Alright, so in this tutorial I'm gonna teach you how to use Remix together with the Prisma to build a full stack application that uses a Postgres database and Remix as the front end. So to get started, we start by running npx create remix and the name of our app. So in our case, let's call it Easy Shop because we want to build a basic shop list. We just want the basics. Let's prepare this to be deployed on fly.io. We won't cover the deployment process in this video though. So then we run npm install. While this runs, I'm gonna go ahead and check out the instructions for installing Tailwind CSS into Remix. And here we can decide whether or not we want to use TypeScript. I do, so I'm gonna choose that. And that's it. Let's head into our app. Let's run the script for installing Tailwind CSS. But before we do that, let's initialize this as a Git repository. And let's add the following content, and let's create a initial commit. Now we can run this. Let's configure our Tailwind config. And let's add the scripts. And let's create our CSS file. And let's create another CSS file inside of the app directory. And then we can go to the root. We can import a style from there. And then we create a link to actually link the style sheet with Remix. And let's start by running build CSS one time. Some issue in the package.json. There we go. So now we can see we have a generated CSS file in styles.app.css. So let's go ahead and run this project with npm run dev and open it up on localhost 3000. So this is what we got right now. Not much, but let's set up some basic markup and CSS. Right, so now we can go ahead and install Prisma. So to do this, we simply run npm install Prisma and Prisma client. And then we have to initialize our Prisma folder. So let's run npx prisma init. This is going to add a couple of things for us. For example, our .env file, where we can provide a database URL. I prepared this a bit, so I have a database running on localhost /EC shop. We can create our models. So for this, I'm going to use my tool that I built at prismabuilder.io, which is a bit easier than writing the file. So we can call this EC shop. And the first model we want is basically so I think we can keep this a bit simple. So let's just create the item, which is going to be an item in a shop list. Just for the sake of time, I want to users and shop lists and all of that. So we just provide a set of items that we can handle in our front end. So I want this to have a name that's going to be unique and it's required. And yeah, I think that's pretty much done. Maybe some sort of quantity. So let's do like amount. Let's keep this as an int. So you'd have to provide this in grams. Let's not make this required. Okay, to generate it, we can hit this, and we will get our models. Now to create a migration and applying this, we can run npx prisma migrate dev name, and we can call this item model. We can then run npx prisma generate to generate our Prisma client. And now we're ready to use Prisma. So how are we going to structure this? First of all, I'm going to create a loader in Remix. I'm going to use the loader function type. Make this asynchronous. And here we can retrieve the items. So one thing we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to initialize a Prisma client instance. So there's a pretty good snippet out there on the Remix website. So let's head over there. Let's see if it's this one. No. It's this one, the Jokes app. This is the file we want. So this basically makes sure that it only sets up one instance to the database and doesn't create several. Let's create a utils. and a file called db.server.ts. We paste this, and then in our index file, we can now get our items with db.item.findMany, and then we can return a JSON object with the items as the parameter. And then to retrieve this data in the component, we use the use loader data. And here we can basically tell this to be an array of the type item. So here we will have items, I think, yep. So we can map this out with items, .map, item, like this. So if we save this and we go ahead and go into here, we won't see anything because we don't have any items in our database. But let's go ahead and open up our database. I'm going to go to /ECShop and I'm going to log in. Okay. Why do we not see our tables? That's interesting. I'm pretty confident we did run the migrations, but perhaps this isn't, maybe we're in the wrong database here. Let's see. Here we go. So let's manually add an item to this row. And we're going to have to provide a CUID generator. If we go back now, we refresh, we will see our item. Let's add a little bit of space in between this. There's a little weird thing going on in Remix right now where the hot reloading basically doesn't work when you add new files. But all you have to do is restart the server and the hot reloading will work as expected. Okay. Let's add a way of adding a new item to the shopping list. So to do this, I'm going to use the remix form component. And I'm going to add an input element with a type of text, the placeholder apple, the name of name, the ID of name, let's see, name, and I'm going to add one for amount. This will be a number. And last but not least, I will add a button with the type of submit, to add the item. Now if we go into here, we can see we have our form. Let's add a bit of margin on this too. And let's give it some styling as well while we're at it. So let's give this a space y of 3. We can give this some spacing. And let's give the input field some styling. Let's also add a required property on this. The amount won't be required though. And let's make this flex row. Don't need this. We can change this. And then we can give the button some quick styling as well. Right, so let's keep this at items end. Like that. So, what we have to do now is we have to give this form a method of post to make sure this is going to post and not get. And then we can go ahead and add a action on top of our component. This is basically the function that will get called when you post a form on this page. So let's call this action and use the action function type. Make sure it's asynchronous. And we can call this item await database.item.create to create a new item. We append the data to the data prop. And to get the data from the form, you basically use a parameter from the input called request. And you do await request.form data. And to get the amount, we can do data.get amount, and the same for name. And TypeScript will be a bit angry here because these can be basically anything. So let's say if we don't have a name, we throw error. And let's typecast this to string. Or maybe we can even do right. And amount can be null in this case, so let's make sure this gets undefined if it's null. Actually, null is what we want. No. Okay, so this is probably going to come in as a string from the form, so we might have to do something like this. And then we can go ahead and return this with our JSON response, like this. So let's try this. Apple. We want 100 grams of apple. And it gets added to our list. Nice. Let's give this list a bit of styling as well. And each of these can have some styling. Nice. We can get rid of this. We can give this H5. Nice. Okay. Now let's add a way of deleting each of these items. So let's start by adding a delete button. And let's reuse the styling of this. Nice. And the same way here, we wrap this in a form component. And we give it a method. And in this case, we want this to be delete. Now, in this case, it gets a bit interesting because we don't necessarily want to delete on this URL, because then the action function doesn't actually have any knowledge of which of all of these items we want to delete. So what we have to do in this case is create a resource route. And to do this, we basically just create a regular route, but we give it a .ts extension instead of a TypeScript or TSX extension. So to do this, we create a new file called, let's first create a directory. That would be app.routes items. And then we can say app routes items item id .ts. And that, let's just see if that worked. Nope, it did not. I think we have to skip this character. Oh, we have to write it first, of course. Okay, so here we can export action function. Let's make this asynchronous. So now we have a function that's going to run on the delete method. So let's go back to our index route, and in this case we're going to add a action property and specify the URL we want to delete this to. So this is going to be items item.id. And then we will get this in a parameter here, called params. So we can destructure this. I think let's just load this first and see what we get. We can return JSON. And let's now post this, or delete rather. Interesting. It, for some reason, went to this action, which it should not do. Let's figure out why it did that. Let's do some research. It should work. Oh, okay, there we go. Now it went to the correct place. So something was probably off. But let's see what the params we got was. Right, item ID. So we can pick this out from params. Like the following. And then we can basically go ahead and database dot item dot delete where ID equals item ID. And instead of returning a JSON response here, since we don't have a route that renders any JSX, we can use the redirect function to redirect to the index page, like the following. So let's try this again. We click this button, it goes to the URL, deletes the item, and goes back. Cool. This is basically how you do it in Remix and with Prisma. When it comes to deploying your project, I highly recommend using fly.io. What Fly does for you is it basically puts your server and your database on the same virtual server. And instead of keeping your database on one side of the world and your website on another side, this is way faster to keep it on the same server. I have an example here of a website I built, which is hosted on Fly. And if I go to the page here, it renders more or less instantly, and it's server-side rendered, and it fetches data from a database. I tried hosting this on Vercel and the database on Heroku, and sometimes it took a couple of seconds, 3 seconds, to just go to that page. So I highly recommend checking out fly.io for hosting your app. That helped me a bunch at least. But yeah, that's all for me today. I hope you got something helpful out of it. And please make sure to like this video and subscribe, and recommend it to your friends if you think they would find it helpful. Peace out.